everyone, and welcome back to another book review. Today I'm going to be reviewing Finding Fibonacci, The Quest to Rediscover the Forgotten Mathematical Genius Who Changed the World by Keith Devlin. This book is all about Leonardo of Pisa, whose Liber Abaci, his book, revolutionized mathematics in the Western world, introduced Hindu-Arabic numerals, or popularized Hindu-Arabic numerals in the Western mathematic world, as well as being well known for the Fibonacci sequence. But first of all, if you are new here, I post new book reviews almost every single day on both fiction and nonfiction books. So if you like getting a daily dose of reading inspiration, feel free to stick around. Now, this book, Finding Fibonacci, is primarily about a mathematician who lived in the 1200s. His name was Leonardo of Pisa, but he was given this title or this nickname of Fibonacci. So I'm going to refer to him as Fibonacci, but his name is Leonardo Bonacci, or Leonardo of Pisa is how he was known. I'm just going to use Fibonacci because it's shorter. This book is mostly about the author's search, Keith Devlin, his search for information about Fibonacci. Keith Devlin is interested in him as a mathematician because of how revolutionary his work was and also how little is known about the mathematician who had such an outsized impact on mathematics. So, as mentioned, Fibonacci lived in the 1200s and he wrote a book, Liber Abaci, which was for merchants and the average person to do their business better. Previous to this book, most merchants were using, or all merchants were using, all sorts of other systems to do their calculations. They could have abacuses, there was some sort of finger math in which they could do calculations, but they were all cumbersome and they were all difficult to learn, and there was also no way of recording the transaction. But none of them thought that there could be a better way. Fibonacci, however, his father was involved in this customs house and he was exposed to Arab merchants who use these numbers, which we're going to refer to as Hindu-Arabic numbers. And this sounds very, very complicated. You're like, oh, what's a Hindu-Arabic number? This is a Hindu-Arabic number. These are Hindu-Arabic numbers. They're the numbers that we use day to day, the 0 through 9, and using place notation. So we can have 1, we can have 10, we can have 100, where the place is denoting how big or what the value of the number is, was something that wasn't familiar to the world that Fibonacci inherited. He recognized this had a huge mathematical advantage, and even though there was some translations of Hindu-Arabic numbers and methods using them existing in the Western world, it was really the book that Fibonacci wrote, Liber Abaci, which really popularized this and kind of said, hey guys, there's a better system of doing this, a way that's easier to manipulate numbers, easier to do calculations, and there's a written record of the calculation for us to look back on that totally transformed the Western world. I think one of the things that's really hard to convey, and it's even hard for me to understand, is a world without these numbers. We use numbers so fundamentally in our world that without them, it would be very, very difficult to even imagine what the world would be like. If I just pull a book off my bookshelf behind me, this is a math textbook I have, regression analysis. Here's just a random table from the book. Having to write something without numbers like this, pre-Hindu-Arabic numbers introduction to the Western world, would have been very cumbersome, and it would have been very cumbersome to have done all the calculations necessary to just do basic mathematics. But today we take this invention of these numerals, or this development of the numerals, for granted, when really there was a key mathematician, Fibonacci, who really introduced this and popularized this in the Western world. And his work was almost invaluable. It's very hard to describe, and that was something the author made very clear. It's very hard to really calculate or fully understand how much of an impact this had. This made things so much easier to do, from commerce to calculation, and just from a personal standpoint, thinking on it, I wonder how far mathematics in Europe would have even advanced without a development like this. This seems really crucial for moving on to other forms of mathematics, just because the ease and ability to manipulate numbers seems so crucial to a lot of the mathematics that we do. And I should know, I did a whole degree, my bachelor degree is in mathematics, and I can't imagine having to do that without the number system that Fibonacci was so crucial to introducing. The problem is, that's really where everything we know about Fibonacci stops. He wrote some books, and to have made such an outsized impact in the Western world and then to have very little biographical trace in history is almost a little bit of a frustration. And you sense that with Keith Devlin, as this book really details his search primarily in the country of Italy to find out as much as he can about Fibonacci. He visits monuments, he goes to view manuscripts in various museums, as well as studying translations of Fibonacci's work to try to understand as much as he can about this man who left very little historical trace, but an absolutely massive impact in math, finance, commerce, almost every field that we can think of today. This book, although mentions a lot about Fibonacci, also talks a lot about the author's journey to all these places, him tracking down these manuscripts, him visiting these monuments, him getting translations of these works, and it's just a detail about, 10 years of him going through all of these steps. The lack of information on Fibonacci means that this book really can't be a biography. It's more of a book about the impact that Fibonacci had on the world, as well as a look at the world that Fibonacci himself would have inhabited. So this is what it would have looked like, this is what he did, this is what we know he did through his book, and this is the impact it had on the world around us. That's kind of all that we're going to be able to get about him, which in a sense is frustrating that we know so little, but I feel like the author does a good job making it entertaining. However, this book overall feels like a companion book to another book that Keith Devlin has written, and that was The Man of Numbers. He constantly references this book, and I feel like you get the sense that you were supposed to have read that book first, and then you can read this book, which was how he got all the information for The Man of Numbers, and that was how this was supposed to be read, which I did not read Man of Numbers. I almost wish I had read that book first, because I think my library has it, before going on and reading this book, because I felt like they were supposed to pair and complement each other, and I definitely didn't read them in the correct order. However, I don't think you need to have read A Man of Numbers. I just think it would have been helpful. This stands alone as an interesting piece of math history, as well as a little bit of a travelogue, and it was enjoyable to read nonetheless. There were two things that were called out that two things that I ran into in this book that I just wanted to comment on. The first, when discussing the translation of Liber Bacci into English, which I have to say happened very recently. You think a book that had such a massive impact on the world would have been translated into a modern language, any modern language, not just English, maybe French or German or something. At some point in the last 800 years, it was not. It was only translated, and I want to say it was like 2002 or 2005 into English, which was the first modern language it was translated into. But in order to do this, a professor was doing the translation, and unfortunately he passed away, and the translation became corrupted, and you can read the whole series of events that happened. The professor's wife wound up having to rewrite all of the formulas using special math software. The story is more interesting when you read it in the book. Just trust Keith Devlin's storytelling ability more than you trust my storytelling ability. But they mentioned the system called TEC, T-E and then capital X, which is a math writing system. And it was an approach developed by the Stanford-based computer scientist Donald Knuth. And I just thought that was interesting because I've actually read a math book by Donald Knuth, and the review's on my channel. And that was the book Surreal Numbers. And I thought that was a great book. I love surreal numbers and I liked the writing style. So I just thought it was interesting that a mathematician that I'm familiar with, that I've read, appeared in this book. And Donald Knuth, the Surreal Numbers book by him was a viewer suggestion. The viewer was also a reader because he obviously reads, but a viewer's suggestion. So I'm so glad that person recommended it to me, because now I feel like there's another piece in this mathematician puzzle that I have in my head. So that was just a fun aside and a little plug for my review on Surreal Numbers, which was a book I really enjoyed. The second thing that I wanted to call attention to was Keith Devlin in this book talks again and again about how I feel like in a little bit he's kind of, showing himself off. But he is a bit of a math educator as well as a mathematician, so he's conveying mathematic ideas to the lay people, to people who don't have specialized formal mathematic training. And he does mention how he does that quite a bit, but there's a comment on page 219, if you have this book at home, that I feel like he kind of hits the nail on the head for something that I've noticed and I talk a lot about in my reviews of math books, and that is almost certainly some of the negativity I observe towards mathematics is a consequence of bad experiences in poorly taught math classes at school. It is a natural defense mechanism. When faced with a bad math experience, to convince yourself that you do not think mathematics is important, have in fact chosen not to do it, or even worse, that you are not capable of doing it. And that kind of sums up how I feel about mathematics as a whole. I think it is a subject with a poor reputation that has primarily been developed through poor teaching or not very interesting or well-developed teaching strategies in schools, in which students are either not explained why this is important or all the applications, or just the way it's taught, in my experience, has been quite poor. I actually hated math for like 11 of the 12 years I was in school. I did not like it. It started to get a little interesting in my senior year. I was still not very good at it. It was probably my worst subject. And I only really got interested in it when I went to college. However, by the time people go to college, most of them have fallen off the math train. They don't want anything to do with it. They stopped the moment they could stop taking math classes, which was somewhere, at least in the school I went to, around algebra. You could take algebra and then you could just be done with math as long as you took enough science credits to compensate. So most people fall off the math train before math ever gets interesting. And that's why I'm so passionate about reviewing books on popular mathematics, applications of mathematics, books on math for the lay reader, because I feel like there's this whole world that people don't know about because they've decided that they don't want to do math as a defense mechanism against having a poor math experience in school, with a poor teacher who just told them to do some rote memorization. You have no clue what you're doing. It just seems like a complicated mess that doesn't make any sense. The rules seem arbitrary. You just get the minimum grade you need to pass and you forget it. I think that it's a very rich and interesting subject that has a poor reputation, and if I can do a little bit to change anyone's mind on this, even if having them read some books on math and say, hey, there's some interest there, even if I'm still not very good at it, there's something of interest there and there's something that's applicable and interesting to me, I think that that is a huge part of this math evangelism, I guess you could say, that I'm doing, and that Keith Devlin talks about engaging in because he also wants other people to discover interesting parts of mathematics. And if you have any interest in math history, this Finding Fibonacci might just be the book for you to start with. If you have any thoughts or comments on this book, any thoughts or comments on similar books or suggestions that you think I should read next, please put it in the comments below. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.